You're tuned in to Huntsville Insider. Your inside source for all things Huntsville. And now, here's Mike and Will.
Hello, Huntsville. This perfect 10 be Mike.
I'm Will.
And we're here at Salty Nut Brewery. We want to really thank them so much for their sponsorship of today's program. We also want to thank Rachel Granger, independent Mary Kay representative. She's the one that's doing the charcoal mask giveaway for the people that like the podcast that's about to come up.
Yeah, so today in this episode, we're sitting down with Senator Bill Holtzclaw. Senator Holtzclaw is talking to us about the ABC board. Maybe you're new to town. Say, what in the hell is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
He can explain it to you, how all of it fits into the stuff going on in Huntsville. So take a look.
This is Mike.
I'm Will.
And we're sitting here with Bill Holtzclaw, and you are tuned in to Huntsville Insider, your inside source for all things Huntsville. And as like I said, we're sitting here with Senator Bill Holtzclaw. He just got back from a 5K, but he promised me that he showered.
Yes. And I was going to jump in there and say, and I'm Bill, right in the middle of it.
You should have.
No doubt.
Next time, right?
Yeah, there you go.
We do have some pretty fun stuff that we're going to be talking about today. We're going to get into the lighter side of Senator Holtzclaw, and then some of the business stuff too. Because I think you have a pretty important job. Is that right?
Yes.
And more important than mine, I pet pups for a living. So what we're going to talk about is, we know you came from Arkansas. How did you end up in Huntsville, Alabama?
Sure. Well, back in the day, I graduated high school in 1982 and joined the Marine Corps right out of high school there in Arkansas. Got to go to boot camp out in San Diego, California. I tell people I lived in Arkansas for 18 years, but I grew up in Marine Corps boot camp in about 3 months. It'll make you grow up quick. But after I graduated boot camp, the Marine Corps assigned me the military occupational skill, MOS, your job while you're in the service, as an ammunition specialist. And believe it or not, that school was right here on Redstone Arsenal. Oh yes. You get to blow some stuff. It's not EOD, but EOD are the guys that make it render safe.
Yeah.
I blow in place. We just make it go away. Exactly. Yeah.
So whenever we're at the house, when we hear these giant explosions.
I can't do that anymore, but
okay,
yes, that's the sound of freedom out there on the arsenal.
That's
what that is.
Let's
that's
freedom ring too,
exactly.
And let the smoke cloud go.
There you go.
We see them too. It's amazing.
So my assignment was to come to Redstone in 1983, and I was here for just a few months.
Yeah.
But I'm not gonna lie, I fell in love with this place. I mean, it was just it was just a neat place. So throughout my career, I came back for different follow-on assignments. I came back like in the early '80s and came back in the '90s. As I increased in my time in the Marine Corps and responsibilities, they sent me back for follow-on training.
That's cool.
Because the school was located with the Army. The Marine Corps and the Army do a lot of things very similar. And so we trained in a joint environment. And so I was in and out of this area since as early as 1983. But then in 1999, I got assigned to be the officer in charge. So I was enlisted for 13 years and then came through the Marine Corps' Warrant Officer Program as a technical expert in the ammunition field. And so I was assigned here as the officer in charge in 1999, and that's what actually, I was here long enough to get mail. Because all the other times I was just here for 3 to 4 months, and you just don't really, but my family moved here, and so we've been here 18 years now. We certainly call this place home.
That's awesome, man. We absolutely love the city too, and that's kind of what we were talking about. So you were off and on at least 2 or 3 times coming into the city. Right. We meet so many people that are military families and say, I visited in 1985, and this. I told my wife, whenever I retire, this is the place I'm going to be.
Exactly.
So with your military service, right? You got deployed in a few different places, right?
I did. I traveled. A lot of my career was actually in Southern California. So a young kid growing up, 18 years old in Arkansas, and they sent me out to San Diego, California, at Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, and I'm like, and I'm getting a paycheck. I mean,
awesome.
this was
right.
awesome.
Time to buy a convertible.
I was poor, but I did have some buddies that they taught me to surf.
Yeah.
And so I'm a goofy foot. I'm a lefty, so I had to. But I got to surf some pretty famous places out there. Trestles is the place that's in between Santa Monica and. So as an 18-year-old kid, I was living the dream. But then I went ahead and ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, and she moved out there with me. And then we would travel basically from Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, which is on the coast, and then we would go to Okinawa, Japan. And then we would go to 29 Palms, California, which is in a high desert or near Palm Springs, Palm Desert area, and then repeat. And that's pretty much for 20 years was my
It's kind of going in a
assignments.
circle there.
Exactly for my assignments. Now I did some real world deployments, some peacetime deployments down in Ecuador, another deployment over in the mainland Japan, Korea, some others. I did do 2 real world deployments. I was in the Gulf War and got in theater in '91. Was Al Jabal. Did some ammunition operations on into Kuwait City, and actually re-enlisted for 4 more years in Kuwait City during a combat, which was during combat zone. And so that was pretty neat to be able to do that. And then in '93, I was with some of the first Marines that landed in Mogadishu, Somalia.
Okay.
A lot of your viewers will associate that with Black Hawk Down.
Right.
We left in April of that year, and Black Hawk Down occurred in October. So we were some of the first forces in that secured the airfield and did operations. Exactly. We regained all of the. We retook the embassy that was taken over by the warlords because you weren't fighting a nation state. You were fighting a bunch of thugs.
Right.
So anyway, we retook the embassy. We retook the old soccer complex, and then pushed out into the hinterlands. And established the forward operating bases and whatnot. And then when it became a United Nations operation, you had a much larger force come in, and that's when we rode back to the States. So I left in April, but Black Hawk Down, as we know, it occurred in October, and that was just, quite frankly, you had a change in administration that wanted to fight a war differently, and it turned out very not well for us. So
Right.
It's still a hotbed of terrorist activity.
Right. Well, and I've been to Kenya several times, and so the area of Kenya that I was in usually it was Eastleigh was a neighborhood in Nairobi. They call it Little Mogadishu because that's where a lot of the Somali refugees had come. And you're right. I mean, it's the country has been a failed state for so long. I mean, it's just still a complete mess. But we definitely definitely appreciate folks like you going there as well as Kuwait and
Absolutely.
Keeping us safe here.
Yeah. Good troops, guys.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So you came back, you ended up in Huntsville, and then you decided to continue serving, right? And decided to run for state senate.
Well, 2010, right?
Yeah. Actually, before that, we moved here in '99. I retired from active duty in 2003 and began to think about getting into politics.
Okay.
And I thought maybe this was something I wanted to do, and my wife said, "No, you don't." So my wife was not for it in the early days, but we were actually living in Madison, and I was considering running for the city council. And we prayed about it and really felt like the answer was that we weren't supposed to do it yet, but maybe later.
Yeah.
And so fast forward to 2008, and there was an open seat on the Madison City Council, and so I ran for that in 2008. And that started by literally reading the paper. You remember we used to get a paper every day?
Yeah, every now and again.
And so I was reading the paper, and there were some things going on at Madison City Hall during that time frame that just ruffled my feathers as an individual. I'm now invested in Madison. The first home I ever bought in my life was in Madison. And I said, somebody ought to do something about what's going on at City Hall. And so that somebody became me. And so I ran for office. That was in the very first term that now Mayor Paul Finley was elected. So we were both elected with a few other folks that were on the city council. And so I served there for 1 year, and then the next year I was elected as council president by my peers and served as council president in 2009. And then that's when we began I actually was contacted by folks to consider running for the state legislature. And so in 2010, we first ran for the state legislature and were successful in winning that seat.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that is a whirlwind, right?
It is.
Imagine that 2 years, how fast that thing went. So you had in 2008, you're a city representative on city council. 2010, the state senator, man.
State senator. Exactly.
Well, if you go big or go home.
There you go. We're doing that.
That's right, man.
We're doing that.
Because we got some other stuff we're going to talk about.
Exactly.
Right. So, obviously the stuff that's in the news most probably is national stuff. What the president's doing, things like that. But
what
the
Melania
way
is wearing,
whether she's got the heels and hats and. But at least the way the country started, it was meant that a lot of major decisions, the decisions that affect people most directly, happen closer to home, right?
Right.
And that's why I love following state government, just because, stuff in Washington absolutely matters, but probably the stuff that affects day-to-day stuff happens either on the city council level or in Montgomery, right?
Exactly.
So just tell us about getting to Montgomery, just that experience of kind of, I mean, you're a new state senator going down there for your first session of the legislature.
Well, I will tell you, it's funny you bring that up because you never forget your humble beginnings,
right?
And you shouldn't. You should remember where you came from. And I would tell you that right after we were elected in November, and a little known fact about your state legislation, this is somewhat unique to Alabama. Other states do this, but it's somewhat unique to Alabama. When you win the election on election night in November, the next morning you automatically become the office holder.
Okay.
So, like governor,
Oh, wow.
you were elected in November, but you don't get sworn in until January. Your legislature literally takes office that night.
That's crazy.
So it is. It's insane.
That is
one of my favorite moments is once we won the election, we were at IHOP at midnight. And it was so funny. There was a group that came in at IHOP that night. There was a group. There were some missionaries doing some work, and they had paint on them, so they'd been painting somewhere. There was another group over here they were birthday partying,
Right.
And so they kind of broke out in a happy birthday for their little guy, and we all sang happy. We all just kind of joined in. So I was probably with 18, 20 people of my campaign team. We all joined in. Well, at midnight, my guys start counting down, and then they like, this is Senator Holtzclaw, and everybody joined us into this great countdown. So it's a phenomenal memory of that. And so anyway, probably in December of that year, because the legislative session started in January the next year. So in December, we held a big meeting down in Montgomery with all the Republican legislators. Governor Bentley at that time was serving, and he hadn't been sworn in yet until January. But at that meeting, there was this big table downstairs in the basement of the State House.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at that table, and it was just, we had been there for probably 4 or 5 hours. And it was this surreal moment to me where we had our coat jackets off, our ties were loosened up, and we're talking about all these things that we want to do now that we're going to, when we go into session. And I remember pushing back from that table and looking up and down the table, and I was just like, how in the world did I get here?
That's exactly what I would say.
It was, I'm like, look, I'm this old Marine that was lucky enough to serve my nation for 20 years, and now I'm in the basement of the State House with these guys planning the future of our state.
Right. What direction are we going to take?
And so I leaned, I allowed myself to check out for just those few minutes, and I leaned back into the conversation, and we start going up and down. And I'm going to tell you, one of these guys, and I consider him a friend, but he had a crazy idea. And I remember looking at him going, how the hell did he get here? Because I was seriously thinking, we can't do that. So, those are the type of moments that the memories that I have of being first elected and just getting involved with a great team of guys.
Right. I love the IHOP story.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I didn't know that either. Like you said, that you
take office at
12,
night.
At midnight.
12:01 midnight.
Over
right.
some pecan pancakes.
There you go. There you
Right.
go. My favorite, by the way.
So, and it seems like, at least from what I can tell, you have, I don't know if you have a different philosophy, but at least your interaction with your constituents, at least to me, seems to be somewhat unique for the legislature or the state legislators. You're not only listening to people, and I've heard many people talk about how accessible you are and stuff like that, but you also want your constituents to be informed about what's going on. I mean, you'll be sitting in a committee meeting, posting on Facebook, this is what we're about to vote on. This is where I'm voting, letting people know. I guess as far as your philosophy as a state senator representing Madison, Limestone County, what kind of has been your philosophy of what makes you stand back and say, okay, if I do this, I know I've done a good job.
Right. Well, one of the key things, and you alluded to it earlier, I truly believe that the government closest to the people is most responsive to the people. And when I was on city council, I was very respectful when a group of people came and said, this is an issue and we need you to help solve it. And sometimes they have part of the information, and you've got to help give them more information.
Right.
And I carried that same theme into the state legislature, where I link routinely through a blog that I do. I link to the actual legislation, because I'll have people email me or text me or reach out on social media, and I will respond to them that, look, the bill is here. On my blog, you don't have to go searching for it. You literally click on it, it comes up in a PDF. Read the bill, and then the way legislators communicate, if you don't know, every page is numbered and every line is numbered. So literally page 15, line 3 through line 7, I have a problem with.
Right.
And it's so easy to find because you turn to that page, and right there, and you can say, hey, you know what? You're right. That shouldn't say that. Or, we need to add that because that implies something that we aren't necessarily looking to do. But the value of doing that with constituents, to be able to have, read what I read is often what I will post.
Right.
Because don't allow whether it's media, whether it's a special interest group, whatever, don't allow somebody to spin it into something it's not. And the value of someone being able to read it and then communicate back to me and say, Bill, I read this and it says this.
Right.
But we're reading the same words at least. And we can either strengthen it, we might take something out, or I might be able to say, yeah, but did you read on down where it clarifies that?
Right.
So I'm not a lawyer, and in fact, I remember on a floor debate one time in the Senate, I literally had to ask a colleague that was a lawyer. I had looked it up on my phone. I Googled the word, but I literally asked them. I said, "Well, what does that mean?" And they said it. And I said, "Well, why don't we amend it so that it says that the law shouldn't be written in a way that the common man on the street can't understand it, can't grasp it?" And she was like, okay, let's do it, And so I was able to amend it on the floor. I wish I remembered exactly what it was, but I was like, why are we using this $20 word when the common man on the street needs to be able to understand it? So that's kind of the philosophy that I have.
Right.
So,
go ahead, Mike.
No, thank you. Sorry. So in your opinion, since you've held office since 2010, so you've had 7 years, you've probably seen a little bit change.
Don't forget my city council time.
I'm sorry.
I'm not.
That's right.
Because I learned a lot on city council. Exactly. But what I tell folks is I'm entering my 10th year of office.
Okay, your 10th year's coming up. Yeah. And so in that 10 years, in your opinion, how has the social media changed what you do in kind of your outlook, your approach to? Right. I think because it would probably make it a lot easier to talk to the people that are looking to you to make the right decisions.
It is, and I would tell you I was somewhat of an early adopter of Facebook. Now I have two children; they're 27 and 21 now. But if you think back to when Facebook began, back in
I think I just got Facebook like 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, I've had it for some time, but I remember telling my oldest daughter, who at that time was probably in the 10th grade at Bob Jones, and I remember telling her, I said, I'll never do Facebook. And then when I got into politics, she was one of the first ones that posted on my page, thought you were never going to do Facebook. And then I adopted Twitter as well, and I do like Twitter. I really think it's a very responsive platform. But these same children have since banned me from using, I think it's Snapchat and Instagram. They said my generation has run Facebook and Twitter, so we can't use.
Because I remember when Facebook started, it was actually just for a few colleges.
Yeah.
And you had to have like a .edu email address to be on, and then it expanded to everybody else, and eventually high school kids could get on, and they were all over it, and then their parents and grandparents started getting onto it, and they moved over to Snapchat and Instagram and all that kind of stuff.
So my dad shot me a friend request. I think 2 weeks ago, my knees buckled, and I started laughing. My dad is he's Al Cox. He was commissioner to your athletic program for many, many years. And he was, let's not going to do that. And then when he sends me a friend request, my wife sees this, and she hears me just hysterically laughing, comes into my office and goes, what? And I just turned my phone around and showed it to her. We had a big laugh about that. But I think that it's a great way for ideas that you have for the community.
Exactly.
And you're actually able to get out and let people know what you're doing, where you're going. Because I saw that you posted this morning about the 5K in Athens. That's pretty incredible too.
It is, and you're right that I enjoy using the medium. One thing you have to be aware of is there are some folks, and I'll just call them keyboard warriors.
Oh gosh.
And you never ever engage a keyboard warrior. Okay, whether it's on Twitter or Facebook, it's like, look, they're going to have their moment. And they are literally going to spend the next 8 hours checking their phone to see if I've responded.
Yep.
Okay.
Keyboard tough guys.
Exactly. And I'm just like, look, and hey, I respect it's free speech. You can get out there and say and do what you want. I mean, if you're off track, I will sometimes say, yeah, here's the facts.
There you go.
But I don't get into their world. I stay on the military high ground and have a better view of the battle space. But no, in all seriousness, properly used, I really do believe Twitter and Facebook and social media in general. Last thing I'll say with that is there have been times where I've asked especially now we're empty nesters, but back when my girls were at home and my wife would all be sitting in the living room in the evening, and I'd be like, hey, how's this tweet sound?
I still do that.
You can't do that.
I every now and again, holler down the hallway, "Hey, honey,
Exactly.
can you come
And you know
look
the
at
answer.
this?"
You know the answer.
She just shakes her head. It's like, good grief.
Some of my best tweets have been deleted. I'll just put it that way.
Nice.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the specific things that you've been a part of, experienced down in Montgomery.
Okay.
So, of course, we're in the Salty Nut Brewery right now,
That's
and one of the big, I guess you could say, obstacles to a lot of things that have happened with the breweries in Alabama has been the ABC board. We've got a lot of folks here in Huntsville who probably have no clue what that is. And so I actually did a little bit of research on it, right? The ABC board is the Alabama Beverage Control Board. It was established by an act of the legislature in 1937. So you had the 18th Amendment in 1920, and it was repealed, of course, in 1933. And then I guess not too long after that, Alabama decided, well, we can't just have, alcohol everywhere. We got to have somebody to keep it in check, right? So, right, and so it may take me just a second to pull this up, but I wanted to read from the actual act that was passed. So, the Alabama Beverage Control Act of 1937. This was part of the bill. It said to promote temperance and suppress the evils of intemperance, to regulate and control the manufacture, purchase, bottling, sale, distribution, transportation, handling, advertising, possession, dispensing, drinking, and use of alcohol.
Right, man.
Right.
That is clear as muddy water.
Right.
In modern language, too.
Yeah, that's right, man.
Temperance. I used that just the other day.
Me too.
The act called for the protection, welfare, the protection, welfare, health, peace, and morals of the people. So that's what the board is supposed to do, I guess.
Yeah.
So, of
Are you
course,
listening at home? You'll need to look that up.
Right. So basically, what all that means is they control pretty much every bit of alcohol bought, sold, used in the state of Alabama. Right. And as of late, it seems like they've had a lot of controversial things going on, and so I was hoping we could just talk about a few of them. One of the pieces of legislation that you sponsored, it was Senate Bill 234, I believe, for the growler laws, right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, the growler bill was actually brought to me by some of the folks that own these breweries around the state, and they really felt like, well, believe it or not, and you guys may do this, but there's a lot of folks that travel to craft breweries because they enjoy going, and hey, while we're here, let's look up a craft brewery, and they do that around the state. And we have a lot of folks that come into Huntsville because of
the beer trails.
The beer trails, yeah. But I mean, a lot of folks that come in for work, doing this high-tech scientific work, well, in the evenings, they like to go, so they're coming in from all around the nation, and our guys do the same. But anyway, a lot of the breweries came to me in Montgomery and said, it's killing us that someone can't leave our premises with a six-pack. So they can come here and drink at the tap room and have a beer, but they can't walk out with a six-pack of what they just had. They have to either go to some other distributor or go to somewhere. And so that's what the growler bill began to address.
Right.
It's called off-premise consumption.
Right.
And so it pulled away from that, which made no sense. There's no business sense or otherwise to be able to. It actually is bad because you can come here and drink it, and it's like, if you go over to this place, you can buy a six-pack. Okay, so we want us to drive to go, and that's not
Right.
So at any rate, it turned into being able to pass that, and obviously that we called it the growler or the crowler because you can actually bring yours own in and fill it.
Right.
And I had some people that contacted me and says, I can have I can fill my growler at Publix. So anyway, I don't know exactly where that was at, but folks were very happy about that, and so that was one that we passed. Of course, probably the greatest compliment I think that I've been paid with regards to the craft brewer industry was when we passed the Brewery Modernization Act, and that's the bill that actually came before the growler bill that allowed the breweries to be established. And as a city council guy, I looked at it from the perspective of that, and I said, the state shouldn't be controlling where these locations are. It should be the cities, the municipalities across our state that control that. So we passed the Brewery Modernization Act, and that was a tough fight, guys. It really was. Getting involved in it as a senator, I had some folks kind of raise the eyebrow, like,
What motivated you to, I guess, take up that frosty mug and lead the charge?
Free market. Look around. I mean, deregulation, free market. When somebody came to me and said, "This is why we can't do this," I said that made sense like in the 30s, but it doesn't make sense today.
Right.
Why do we still have this regulation that's constricting this industry? And so, I mean, I won't start naming names because it's almost like you start missing people. And Salty Nut is, I'll name them. But I've got just so many favorite breweries that I enjoy visiting. I enjoy just being a fly on the wall as I walk in. When I see what's going on down the street here, and I see the economic growth, I see the free market at work, and I just see so much happening there. You have entrepreneurs that are investing a lot into this. It's not easy.
A lot of money. Yeah.
They're hiring people, and it's just amazing what you're seeing and what's going on. So literally, it's my interest in deregulation and the free market. And I'll share a quick story on that.
Yeah,
please do.
Was we had passed the bill through the Senate and gotten it through a House committee. So in general terms, I call that we've got a bill on third base. Okay, so really, it's all I got to do is get it off the Senate or off the House floor. I got it. So we got it completely through the Senate process, got it through the committee process in the House. I've got it on third base. I got to bunt that sucker home.
Right.
Okay. So the Free the Hops group had actually we were getting blocked by Budweiser. Budweiser lobbyists were blocking this thing.
Can't imagine.
Okay.
Exactly.
I wonder why.
Yeah. So they were the ones blocking it, and this was I think in 2012 timeframe. So Free the Hops had called a boycott on Budweiser. Okay, across the state of Alabama.
Nice job, guys.
And apparently it rattled them a little bit. Well, then on that Thursday, I was able to pass the bill through the House committee. And so we had it in position, and we were building support to be able to pass it. And I came in we came home for the weekend, and I came back to Montgomery that Tuesday morning, and I walked in my office in Montgomery, and there were 3 guys sitting on the couch in my office in suits and ties with the little briefcases.
Yeah.
And I looked at my secretary, and I said, "Oh," and she said, "Senator, these gentlemen are with Anheuser-Busch. They would like to visit with you."
Wow.
So unannounced, they had flown down, and I said, because I was the
St.
beer,
Louis, right?
Exactly, I was the beer senator, And so I looked at them and I said, "Gentlemen," I said, "apparently we've hit a nerve." I said, "Finally, we got your attention. Come on back."
Right.
And so we went into my office and we sat down with the bill and combed through some things that they had some concerns about, and we were able to flesh that out and make the bill. We relieve their concerns as a corporate footprint, and they also recognize that the craft brew is coming, okay, and you're actually not tapping into their market that typically, which was a big piece to it.
Because to me, it seems like in a lot of cases, and in a town like Huntsville, it's not so much, but like I remember I had a guy who was coming into town, and he was wanting to know of a good place to go hang out after work, and well, let's go to Yellowhammer, I think is where we went, and we walked in, and he just kind of looked around and looked at me, and he said, "They're not going to have Bud Light, are they?" Like, no, probably not. But you're right, though. I mean, it's almost two different markets, right?
I mean, a guy that's sitting there sucking down a Bud Light, sitting on the tailgate. Not that all people that drink Bud Light. That's not the but
right.
That's not going to be the same person that comes to a place like Salty Nut when they're doing a beer release.
Exactly.
It's a completely different market.
So we were able to alleviate the fears that Anheuser-Busch had. And that afternoon, they called their lobbyist off, and then the Free the Hops crowd called off the boycott, and we passed that bill in a couple of days. And then it was the hurdle of getting Governor Bentley to sign it. He was a teetotaler. He drank milk at his inauguration. I mean, he did not, So then there was a little bit of work there to get Governor Bentley on board and say, okay, look, the legislature's passed this. Don't make us override your veto, because he could not sign it or try to veto it. So at any rate, it worked out. It's all history. It's great history. And I was glad to be at ground zero with it.
It really is a great story, and as beer connoisseurs or fanatics as we could possibly say a little more accurately speaking anyway, we thank you. I'm sure that places like Salty Nut and Shay and the brew crew here and the guys up the road at Yellowhammer Straight to Ale, they probably just want to roll a red carpet out for you guys.
Well, there are so many. I have a great relationship with all these guys. Of course, I live in Madison, and I've got Blue Pants, Old Black Bear, Rocket Republic.
Big shout out to Old Black Bear too. Todd Seaton's buddy, and
great
Snuggle
guy.
Trout is an amazing.
Yeah, I'm a Cage City Lager guy, and
Cage City's good too.
and Rocket Republic and Blue Pants. I mean, those guys. I love just being able to roll in there, and I'm just another guy, which I am. I always will be. But I always kind of take a step back and recognize how significant that legislation was to enable those craft brewery industries, and that's just up here. I mean, you get out from here, it's again, I can't start naming names.
Right. Yeah.
Good people.
They're springing up.
I can't start naming names because then you start leaving folks out.
Right.
But it's just really awesome.
And the effect, I mean, these people are making a living doing this now.
Exactly. They're hiring people. Right. They're spending money in the economy. The people that they hire, it's trickle-down economics at its finest. The people that they hire now, they have a job, so they're spending money in the economy, and it's just
we used to learn that stuff in school. Remember that?
Yeah,
ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think these pieces of legislation, because in a lot of these breweries, it started out as people brewing their own beer at home,
exactly.
right?
Yep.
And so you've got some, like we were talking about, who have they've not just their tap rooms, are very popular, but their chain of distribution is far-reaching.
Right.
Now others aren't quite as far along,
right.
and so. Yeah. To be able to sell a growler or a crowler to somebody who comes in the door, I'm sure is a huge boost for their business.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And I didn't realize this till we were talking initially, but a lot of these folks, you've got rocket scientists and defense people and engineers who are brewing beer at home. Some of them have grown into some of the breweries we know.
Exactly.
That used to be a big no-no.
It was against the law until we passed the Home Brew Act, actually.
Yeah, right.
And another one that kind of raised some eyebrows, myself and Speaker of the House, Mac McCutcheon, from the Monrovia area, was the House sponsor of that legislation. You always have a House and a Senate sponsor. Speaker McCutcheon was the House sponsor of that, and I was the Senate sponsor of the Home Brew bill that made it. We took how it was illegal in the first place. I don't know.
Scratch my head on that one too.
That's one of those laws where apparently you can't carry an ice cream cone in your back pocket. Which how that's a law, I don't know.
Can't make a donkey inside.
Exactly. So there's I'm sure there's a serious health issue there somewhere.
Probably.
But the point is, as you had just pointed out, there was a risk because at one point we had the ABC board that were actively investigating and prosecuting people that were violating the law with home brew. Now, they're violating the law. Kudos to you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But really, aren't there criminals that we can go after and not a rocket scientist that's wanting to do some home brew?
Yeah.
So I had guys tell me, Bill, if I lose my clearance, I lose my job.
Yeah,
and if I get arrested, I can lose my clearance.
Right.
And so when I laid that message to my colleagues in the Senate and was able to garner support, and I said, tell me why you don't want somebody to do this. They're not selling it. You still can't sell it. Out of the back of your car. That's part of the concern is, this home brewer is going to show up on the side of the road and sell it out of the back. It's like, no, but apparently you can sell shrimp out of the back of your truck.
Right.
That's not going to hurt anybody.
Exactly. So anyway, I love buying the shrimp out of the back of the truck. So.
We gotta be
We're both having that.
Yeah, we have to.
Right.
It's like,
So,
get real close on the mic when you say that to ladies and gentlemen. I love shrimp out of the back of a car.
So, you kind of alluded to the ABC board, and it seems like, to me, just observing, like a lot of times they start coming up with solutions for things that are not problems.
Exactly.
You mentioned the home brew thing. There was a huge controversy. They were cracking down on restaurants in Mobile because you have a restaurant downtown. There's the sidewalk. There's a rule, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, right? So the ABC board, they're not elected.
No, they're appointed. Right? It's an appointed 3-member board.
Okay, and because of their mandate through that law back in 1937, basically they don't need approval. They just get to make the rules that they want to make, right?
Yes, and all of your agencies are actually like that. There are the legislature, and there's some good to this, okay? Where not in this instance, but in a broader spectrum, okay? There are instances where you have varying boards or agencies that have control over subordinate things, okay? And rather than the legislature having to write a law, which then has to pass a majority of the House and the Senate to specifically address an issue, what you do is you give those boards or agencies the ability to promulgate the rules within certain parameters.
Right.
Okay. And the theory is because they're appointed members of a board, typically they have some background in what they're governing as an appointed member, and that they're going to have more knowledge of it and collectively say, we need to promulgate a rule that maybe tightens this up, or we can loosen that rule up, but they do it as a rule-making body. But when they stray out of bounds is where myself and others begin to get involved and say, look, you can either promulgate that rule differently, or I will write a law that clarifies it for you.
Yeah.
And a good example of that was when we did the off-premise bill. The ABC tried to enforce, and this was really blew up, especially up here in this community.
Off-premise bill, is that the Purple Cups?
No, the off-premise bill was for you to be able. That's
the growler bill.
The growler.
Sorry, yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. But when we passed that bill, the ABC looked at the language of the law and said, okay, you can leave with a 6-pack, but they have to write down your name, your driver's license number, your address, your phone number.
Picture of you in a zebra costume.
It was crazy.
Blood samples.
Yeah. I mean, it was just absolutely crazy. And so I had to meet with the ABC and say, look, and of course we were out of session, so there's a timing issue for us to get back into legislative session. But I had to go and say, look, guys, we've got to fix this because why are you collecting that? I'm like, well, because the law says over here, and what they were, in a nutshell, what they're having a hard time understanding is when the guys brew here at Salty Nut, they have a brewer hat on, and they sell to a distributor who then takes it out to wherever else you can purchase their 6-packs. That qualifies where they need to say, you purchased this much, we gave it to this distributor, we're going to have all this contact information for a distributor. What the ABC couldn't see is that when the brewer took his hat off and became a tap room and I'm going to now sell and put this hat on, that those same things don't apply. They were trying to follow the letter of the law, the intent of the law, and couldn't see.
But it doesn't translate.
Not at all. Exactly. And everybody, the brewers were scared to death. They didn't want that personal information of their customers. They didn't want to ask one, much less have to maintain it. And there was no documentation of.
I walked into a brewery once, and whenever they were new, and we can sell growlers now, and they started, what can I, use your license and stuff, and make sure your address matches. And I was like, never mind, dude. It's like, you can keep it.
Exactly.
I'll come in here and have a pint or two, but
So it was a huge invasion of privacy, a huge invasion of it was just well out of bounds, and so we convinced the ABC that they needed to back down, which they did. And then we clarified it with a bill this year that fixed it and removed the requirement. Clarified exactly what you saw, that it didn't translate. And so we had to clarify that in the law so that their lawyers have something else to go look at now and not trying to fix it.
And it seems like they do just, it's like they, again, to me, it seems like they just kind of get a wild hair. And it's like they decide they're going to focus on something like in Mobile, they had restaurants downtown. There's a rule that says
I don't understand. But please continue,
right,
Mr. Grice.
They said, and it was across the state, but most of the things I read, they were cracking down in Mobile. And, so you have these restaurants downtown. They have little chairs and stuff on the sidewalk. The ABC board was coming in and saying, oh, well, they can go inside to get a beer and drink it inside, but you can't serve it to them outside because this is a public right-of-way. For like a couple of weeks this summer, they were cracking down on pictures of margaritas. Apparently that didn't last very long, but I don't know. It seems like I'm at least glad and it seems to be a bipartisan thing at least. Like down in Montgomery, we have folks that are kind of keeping them in check.
Right.
One of the big things probably that you stood up for that it seems like a lot of your colleagues maybe didn't was the I'm just going to call it a tax increase.
It was the backdoor tax.
Right, and this is information from the actual ABC board.
Yeah, listen up, folks.
And I thought this was interesting. So they kind of put this hypothetical out there, right? And you can help me understand this a little bit better. So, like, let's say a bottle of liquor costs $10. That's where they get it from Jack Daniels or Jim Beam, whoever, right? Mm-hmm. So it costs $10. There's a 30% markup from the ABC board. Mm-hmm. Then there's a 56% state tax. Is that like a liquor tax probably?
Right, exactly.
So, and I can't imagine a lot of things that people would be okay with being taxed.
56% tax.
Right, plus the markup. And then there's the 6% sales tax. And then they come up with that's where you get the price for, a bottle that you might buy from the state store, a private retailer, which I guess is probably a little bit more. So what they wanted to do, that 30% markup, they wanted to change it to 35%. 35%. So basically, it's a 5% tax increase.
Yes. That
nobody had to vote on.
Yep. The
governor didn't have to sign, and they let everybody know they were going to do it. And it seems like everybody was just kind of like, okay.
But it's almost like they said, hypothetically speaking, like you mentioned earlier. Hey, what if we did this and then it just poof?
Well, there's some backstory in that I'll share without putting everybody to sleep, so stay awake as best you can. But the backstory is that there are a couple of counties you can pass local legislation, so legislation that only applies to a county and not otherwise. And in the ABC in the code section that the ABC is under, there was the ability to increase that per county, but it would be local legislation. So only the legislators in that county passed it and applied it to the courts. Okay, because you had a problem with some of your courts being able to get funded. So a couple of counties did that. It was certainly never brought up here as something that we want to do here in North Alabama, but a couple of counties did it. And then some other folks kind of said, well, if they're doing it, in these counties, we need to do it statewide. So that's where it became introduced. Okay, and it actually was inserted in the budget, believe it or not, and that's where I got wind of it. So I sit on the General Fund Budget Committee, and I'm reading in the budget where we're going to authorize a 5% tax increase on alcohol that is then going to go to fund the courts. Now, guys, I'm all about funding the courts. Don't get me wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay, and we've done things to fund the courts through we increased the fee that could be collected for a bad check to help fund the courts. Well, when's the last time you wrote a check? I mean, no one's going in that direction.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Go to the doctor's office. And, you'll write like 7 or 8 of them when you get home.
But by and large, we're not paying our utility bills and our car payment, insurance. We're not writing checks anymore. So at any rate, the courts were suffering, and I recognize that we needed to address that. But I didn't want to address it through hiding a tax increase. I called it a backdoor tax increase in the State House because how they hit it in the budget. And I worked in committee to cancel it out, and I worked on the Senate floor to cancel it out. I had 8 other conservative colleagues join me, but the rest of my colleagues just chose not to, and they have to answer the question with their constituents.
They do.
So it was, to me, it was just a wrong way to do a tax increase.
Right, absolutely. Now we've talked a lot about beer and liquor and the ABC board and stuff. You've worked a lot with legislation for like drunk driving, and in 2013, Mothers Against Drunk Driving named you their Legislator of the Year.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about those efforts.
I would tell you that while I'm obviously a fan of what we're doing here with respect to free, open market, free market, and the breweries to be able to do what they do, I'm also very much a proponent of drink responsibly. Having a designated driver, drinking responsibly, and some of the work that we did with the interlock ignition devices that requires, if you're a multiple offender DUI, it requires the courts to have you install an interlock device on your car.
Yep.
Which, I mean, if you're a multiple offender, which a lot of times you'll read in the press where this guy was pulled over 8 times for DUI and then he killed someone. It's just horrible situation. I'll be the first to recognize that an interlock ignition device is not a fail-safe. There are people that are going to try to work around a variety of things. But we did. I was the senator that championed that legislation and brought it into our state. We were one of a handful of states that didn't have that requirement. And there really wasn't the interlock ignition device presence in our state at all until we passed that legislation. And we've made a couple of changes to it along the way, but I was honored that Mothers Against Drunk Drivers recognized me as the Legislator of the Year when that happened in 2013.
We appreciate everything they do as well.
Yep.
I mean, that system is going to save lives.
Exactly.
It really will.
Exactly.
And yes, if you are out there, drink responsibly.
And it starts with, and I'll plug it too, and I'll tweet it out actually on New Year's Eve and on other holidays. Hey, make a plan.
Absolutely.
And have a designated driver. Have somebody that says, you know what, I'll be the guy that's going to listen to y'all's jokes that aren't funny after y'all have had a few drinks. But have somebody that does that, because drink responsibly. Our lives are in danger. Our children's lives are in danger. Do the right thing, and it's as simple as that.
Absolutely, man.
That's the message.
And especially nowadays with Uber, Lyft.
There's no excuse.
Exactly.
It's.
I mean, cabs can be expensive, but I mean, there's when you pull it up on your phone, you request a ride, they're there in like 2 minutes.
Exactly.
It's cheap.
Literally the push of a button.
Yes.
Right.
Call someone.
Yeah. So that's obviously something I'm very proud of as well.
Right.
It should be.
Now, as a Marine, you've also worked with legislation, got legislation passed that concerns veterans.
Yes.
Right. Tell us about that.
Yeah. I always recognize that in our state alone, I mean, we have a huge National Guard presence. Our state has a lot of people that have volunteered to serve in the armed forces. There's a lot of sacrifice involved in that. I personally lived that with. I missed the birth of my first daughter. I was kind of around during some of their growing up, but deployments cause you to be away. So taking care of the family, taking care of the veteran, doesn't matter if they serve 3 years or 30 years, they've sacrificed to our nation, for our nation, and we certainly need to make sure that we take care of our veterans, take care of their families, our aging veterans, the World War II, Korea, Vietnam, we really, we messed up a lot. Of course, I was very young, but we messed up a lot with the Vietnam guys and didn't recognize a lot of what we're recognizing now with our Iraq and Afghanistan veterans.
Right.
So, and the number one thing I'll leave with you guys on that, though, is we have an all-volunteer force. We haven't had a draft since Vietnam. We've had an all-volunteer force. The reason we have an all-volunteer force is because, number one, the military is an opportunity for young men and women in our high schools and colleges to serve our nation. Okay, and they want to serve something greater than themselves. And so that's a key piece. But we have got to show as a nation that we're going to take care of those that have served and are serving so that we can continue to draw some of our nation's finest that want to serve in our nation. If we begin to not take care of these folks that are on active duty or retired or have been injured during service, then we're going to lose that pipeline of volunteer force that young men and women that at that 5K I ran this morning, there was a group of from Decatur and I believe Florence area that came over to run, that are all a group of young kids in high school that are going to go to boot camp in the next year. And so the recruiters were there. They ran in formation. I got a chance to speak with them very briefly. But, that's the future of what's going to protect our nation. And we need to take care of our veterans to do that. So that's really the genesis of why
if we fail there, then we fail on so many different levels. I mean, just take care of the people that are protecting us.
Exactly.
I mean,
and I would throw this in too. I mean, every once in a while you see stuff in the news about the VA, especially, and some of the mismanagement there. Every once in a while, but it seems like by and large, I don't know. It seems like folks don't necessarily think about our veterans, the people who have served, think about their needs, and where we've, as a nation, fallen short in, following through with the promise.
We have, and our nation remains at war right now. As we speak, there are men and women in harm's way, and it's no longer front page news.
Right.
And so it becomes front page news when something terrible happens, as opposed to the offensive operation. So it's something we need to remember.
And it's great to know that there's folks like you who are working behind the scenes every day, to make sure, like you said, that we take care of the people who fought for us.
I appreciate it.
Well, we're about out of time. Do you have anything to add, Will?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you real quick, and we got a few minutes here, but so even people who just moved to Alabama probably know that not too long ago we had a change in the governor's mansion.
Yes, we did.
And you had a front row seat for that. Salty Nut here kind of got put on the map with a pretty clever thing that they did.
They did.
Just, if you don't mind, give us a quick synopsis, not necessarily as a state senator, but, but just having a front row seat to all that drama.
It's not lost on me. I don't know if I'll ever write a book, but if I do,
buddy, you should, man.
If I do, having I appreciate it. Having a front row seat to the impeachment of a governor. And just all that went on there, and of course he decided to resign rather than taking it all the way to the impeachment. It was just surreal. There was a lot of education for me, a lot of education for constituents who I would come home and they say, Bill, why don't you just impeach the governor? He's guilty of this and this. And I said, well, first of all, we're a country of laws and we're a state of laws, and we've got to take that into account. But the process works by the House of Representatives, which is your body that has to bring forth articles of impeachment. And when they pass those articles of impeachment and they then come to the Senate, we then become the jury, and your Supreme Court justice becomes the judge, and we go through a trial, And so we can't just go with third base. We got to do first, second, we got to do these things. So, but to be a front row seat to that and to see what happened, I mean, looking back, I'm glad that Governor Bentley did step down. I think he lost I think everybody recognizes that he lost his way. Whether or not he did something illegal, and there were investigations going on, and of course that's all intertwined into where we are today. But I will tell you this, Governor Kay Ivey stepped in. I worked with Governor Ivey when she was the lieutenant governor for the last 7 years. Phenomenal leader. And she's done a wonderful job stepping in and righting the ship is her thing. And I think we've done that.
And that's kind of what I was wanting to get to kind of ask you is, I mean, there's been a lot of negative things happen with people at the top in Montgomery over the last several years. Is your sense that maybe Alabama's kind of turned a corner in a sense? I mean, do you feel like the folks who are down there now, I mean, do you feel like we're finally moving in a positive direction where a lot of not just the corruption in the last few years, but that's really been part of Alabama politics for a long time, but maybe we're getting past some of that?
You know, the best way I can answer that, Will, is we have passed stronger ethic laws.
Right.
I follow the law. You know, I can use the adage, if I take a horse to water, but I can't make him drink.
Exactly,
okay.
yeah.
The folks that I'm close with in the legislature, I believe they're doing the right things for the right reasons. You know, I go to Montgomery to represent the people who sent me to Montgomery. I want to represent the people that sent me the same way I want to be represented.
Right.
As you know, I've already announced that I'm running for Congress.
Absolutely.
I'm vacating my seat. I'm not running for re-election. I'm not vacating the seat. I'm not running for re-election. So I will not be a state senator regardless of the outcome in November of 18. Whoever wins that night at midnight will become the state senator. During that same time frame, I'm running for U.S. Congress.
Right.
But my goal, whether I'm in city councilman, whether I'm a state senator, or whether I'm a U.S. congressman, I want to represent the people how I want to be represented. Because one day, I'm going to be a former state senator, former congressman. I'm already a former city councilman. And I want somebody that's in that row to represent me. I hope to set an example that somebody else is going to represent me in that same fashion.
Senator Holtzclaw, we can say this beyond a shadow of a doubt. We think you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you.
You have any closing thoughts, Will?
Yeah. Again, just we appreciate you being on.
Absolutely.
I was excited to see your announcement to run for Congress.
Me too.
Real quick, just why would you make a great congressman for this district in Alabama?
Well, and we've just covered a good bit of it. One of the key things that I think is missing is I will listen to and represent the people of this district how they need to be represented, not based on my ideologies, but based on the majority of the people that elect me to serve in that office. I have to have a finger on the pulse of what's going on in the district. And the way to do that is you communicate with the people in the district. You make yourself accessible, and you're responsive to who they are and what they are. We may disagree, but I'm not scared to come before you and say I supported this because, or I opposed this because, and help you, the people that I'm representing. I guess the best way to put it, I don't want to govern, I want to represent.
Wonderful.
That's the best.
Couldn't have said it better ourselves. Again, Senator Bill Holtzclaw, we really appreciate you being on, running for Congress, guys. This is going to be amazing. We want to give
real quick.
Yes, sir.
What's your website?
Website is holtzclawforcongress.com.
Awesome.
holtzclawforcongress.com. We want to give a big thank you to Salty Nut Brewery as one of our sponsors. Also, Miss Rachel Granger, independent Mary Kay rep.
Right.
She's sponsoring this show as well. She's also going to be giving away a charcoal mask to anyone that she's just going to pick them at random. Like, comment, share whenever we post this thing out. And again, you're tuned in Huntsville Insider. We will see you next time. Your inside source to all things Huntsville.